Unmasking Samantha Wohlford, the true crime story of Ernie Ibarra's murder. It was 1 a.m. on February 20th, 2015, and Mount Pleasant, Texas, was blanketed in an eerie stillness. The streets were quiet, with not a sound to be heard. But inside the Ibarra home, that silence would soon be shattered. Samantha Wohlford had just drifted off to sleep when a faint noise woke her. Her heart skipped a beat, and a cold shiver ran down her spine. She lay still, listening intently, but there was nothing but the silence of the night. And then it came again. A muffled sound, footsteps. The door creaking. Her heart raced, her mind spinning with fear. Was it just the wind? Or something more? Her hand reached for her phone, the air thick with dread. Samantha's breath quickened as she dialed her mother's number, barely able to form words. Someone's broken in, they've taken Ernie, her voice trembled. Please, call the police. They tied me up, they took him. Her hands were shaking so violently, it was a struggle to press the phone to her ear. Samantha had always felt safe in her home. But tonight, that safety was gone, replaced by a growing terror. She fought to control her breathing, still unable to comprehend what was happening. Every instinct screamed for her to get up, to run, but she was frozen. Every moment felt like an eternity. What had happened to Ernie? Why was she alone? When the police arrived, the scene was strange. The front door was open, but there was no sign of forced entry. Nothing was stolen. The furniture in the living room was in place, untouched. And yet, Samantha was found bound to a chair, her face pale and stricken with fear. But something about her demeanor seemed off. Why wasn't she frantic? Why hadn't she screamed for help? Why had no one heard anything? The officers exchanged glances. Samantha repeated her story over and over, but it didn't sit right with them. Intruders broke in, tied me up, took Ernie. She insisted, her voice quivering, but oddly too calm. Something didn't add up. The officers noticed it immediately. There was no sign of struggle. No noise. No visible distress. But Samantha's story remained unchanged. Why hadn't she fought back? Why didn't her children wake up? Why was she so calm? The questions kept coming. The more they dug into her version of events, the more inconsistencies appeared. And soon, it became clear, this wasn't a random break-in. It was something far darker. The detectives began to question the possibility that Samantha was not the victim she portrayed herself to be. And so, the investigation into the tragic night of February 20th began, a story of lies, manipulation, and a life about to be turned upside down. The truth, they knew, was buried somewhere deep beneath the surface. Samantha Wohlford always believed she deserved more than life had given her. Born into a modest family, she dreamed of becoming a veterinarian, but that dream quickly faded when she couldn't bear the thought of euthanizing sick animals. Instead, she turned to another dream, motherhood. A dream of building the perfect family, a life filled with love, and a home full of joy. In 2008, at just 19 years old, Samantha's dream of motherhood began when she found herself pregnant with twins. But the father quickly disappeared, leaving her to raise the children alone. Despite the struggle, Samantha pushed forward, working multiple part-time jobs to support them. A close friend later revealed that, despite her outward strength, Samantha relied heavily on food stamps and social assistance to make ends meet. Then, in 2011, Samantha met Ernie Ibarra. Ernie was everything Samantha thought she needed: a supportive, kind man who accepted her children as his own. They quickly became inseparable, and within a year, they had more children together, completing their family. Samantha thought she had found her happy ending. But as time passed, things began to shift. Ernie worked tirelessly to support the family, but Samantha grew discontent. It was never enough. She longed for something more than being just a wife and mother. Her frustration grew, and with it, the desire to achieve something bigger. She turned to YouTube, launching a channel called Simply Manic to document her struggles with motherhood. But despite her efforts, her videos barely reached an audience, and her dream of internet fame remained out of reach. As her online persona consumed her, she grew further from Ernie, who couldn't understand her ambitions. By 2013, her resentment toward Ernie had reached a boiling point. She began portraying him as lazy and unsupportive, exaggerating her struggles for sympathy. She sought validation from the internet, but her relationship with Ernie suffered. Samantha continued to chase an image of herself as a victim while her marriage deteriorated. Despite temporarily separating, Samantha couldn't let go of the idea that she could still control the situation. In her mind, it was no longer just about their failing marriage, it was about having everything she ever wanted. And soon, she would decide that the only way to get it was to eliminate Ernie from the equation entirely. By 2013, Samantha's life had taken a turn she couldn't reverse. She was caught in the depths of her own dissatisfaction. The house, the children, the life she had dreamed of, it was no longer enough. Ernie's love and support had become a burden to her. The more she tried to build her online persona, the more she pushed him away. He was everything she had wanted, but now he was a roadblock. Ernie worked long hours, doing whatever he could to provide for the family, but Samantha could no longer see the man she had fallen in love with. She saw only a man who was holding her back, keeping her from what she truly wanted: freedom. And that freedom, she told herself, came at a price. The tipping point came when Ernie finally pushed back. His patience had worn thin. The endless complaints, the obsession with the internet, the constant portrayal of their life as a struggle, it was too much for him. He left her. Just like that, their family was torn apart. The man she had been so desperate to hold onto was now gone, and for Samantha, this was the moment when everything fell apart. But in the chaos, something snapped inside her. Losing Ernie wasn't just about the marriage, it was about her image, her life, and the power she thought she could control. The idea of splitting everything, custody, assets, was unbearable to her. What would she do without Ernie? She had already built her life around the idea of being the victim, and now she was being cast aside. Her entire existence, the one she had so carefully crafted, was crumbling. Samantha needed to fix things. But not by fixing her marriage. She needed a way out. Divorce was an option, yes, but it meant splitting everything. She couldn't let that happen. Not when she had finally begun to see the life she thought she deserved. The money, the power, the control, it was all within her grasp, and she wasn't about to lose it. So, Samantha did what any desperate person would do. She began plotting. She couldn't let Ernie take everything from her. She couldn't lose the house, the lifestyle, the control she thought she had worked for. If he wouldn't leave her on her terms, she would make sure he never could again. She turned to others, those she could manipulate, those desperate enough to help her. Jonathan Sanford, Jose Antonio Ponce, and Octavius Lamar Rhymes. These men had no idea what they were about to be involved in, but Samantha promised them a piece of the reward. Money. Stability. Power. It all sounded so sweet. And in her mind, it was the only way to make everything right. She promised them it would be quick. A simple plan to rid herself of Ernie, to take back what she thought was rightfully hers. Little did they know, this plan would change everything and lead to a bloodbath none of them could undo. The plot had begun. And Samantha was ready to do whatever it took to get everything she wanted, no matter the cost. The days leading up to February 19, 2015, were filled with a quiet tension, a stillness that belied the chaos that was about to unfold. Samantha had made her decision. Ernie had to go. And she knew exactly how she would make it happen. Samantha didn't make this choice lightly. She had thought about it, planned it, and found the right people to help her carry it out. Jonathan Sanford, Jose Antonio Ponce, and Octavius Lamar Rhymes. These men, with their own troubled pasts, were ripe for manipulation. Samantha knew exactly how to play them. She offered them money, the promise of a better life. They didn't question her motives, they only cared about what she could give them. And with that, her plan was set in motion. The original idea was simple: make it look like a random break-in. Samantha would feign fear, pretend to be the helpless wife, while the men would take Ernie, tie him up, and leave with him. A quick escape, and no one would ever suspect a thing. But as the day of the crime approached, Samantha grew more impatient. Her need for control pushed her to take things further. The idea of just kidnapping Ernie wasn't enough anymore. She needed him gone for good. Her mind raced. This wasn't just about ending the marriage anymore, this was about total domination over her life. The thought of dividing their assets, the house, and the children, Samantha couldn't bear it. She had already built her perfect life in her mind, and she wasn't about to lose it all. This time, Ernie had to die. The night of February 19th arrived, and with it, a series of decisions that would forever change the course of their lives. Samantha sedated her children, ensuring they wouldn't wake up. She needed them to remain oblivious to the nightmare unfolding around them. Ernie, returning from his shift at the pizzeria, was unaware of the danger that lay ahead. His mind was on the usual routine: come home, sleep, and prepare for the next day. But this night, he wouldn't wake up to another day. When Ernie walked into the house, everything seemed normal. But the moment he stepped inside, everything changed. Samantha stood by, playing the role of the victim, screaming as if for her life, while the men did their part. They dragged Ernie from the house, beating him as they went, forcing him into a car. Samantha, pretending to be helpless, remained behind. But inside, she felt a rush of exhilaration. This was it. Her plan was coming together. But things didn't go as smoothly as Samantha had hoped. As they drove to a remote location, Jose Ponce, impatient and eager to end it all quickly, raised a gun to Ernie's head and fired. The shot rang out in the dark night. Ernie fell to the ground, lifeless, while Samantha's plan teetered on the edge of disaster. She had wanted it to be clean, quick, and silent, but it was anything but. The men panicked, but Samantha had already made her peace with the situation. Ernie was gone, and there was no turning back. As the men returned to the house, Samantha gave them final instructions: destroy the evidence, make sure everything was clean. She knew the police would be involved soon, but in her mind, she had already won. Her life was about to change, and there was nothing that could stop it. But what Samantha didn't realize was that her actions would soon unravel, and the truth would come to light. The plan she had so carefully crafted, the people she had manipulated, would soon bring everything crashing down. In her quest for power, she had made a fatal mistake. And it was only a matter of time before the detectives would start putting the pieces together, revealing the truth Samantha had desperately tried to bury. The morning after Ernie's murder, the small town of Mount Pleasant was unaware of the darkness that had unfolded the previous night. But as the day progressed, the shadows of that night began to take shape, and the first cracks in Samantha's story began to show. The police arrived at the Ibarra home, expecting to investigate a burglary gone wrong. But something felt off. The house was undisturbed. No signs of forced entry. Nothing was stolen. No valuables taken. But Samantha was tied up in the living room, her face pale, her voice shaky as she told the officers her story. Intruders broke in, they took Ernie. Her words were almost too rehearsed. The detectives exchanged skeptical glances. They had heard stories like this before, but this felt different. Why hadn't Samantha fought back? Why hadn't she screamed for help? Why hadn't the children woken up? And most of all, why was everything so calm? As they moved through the house, they found small clues: blood spatters near the door, a tuft of hair in the corner, yet there were no signs of a violent struggle. And the more they looked, the more they found discrepancies in Samantha's story. Why did she claim the intruders had used a pink ribbon to tie her up, but the police found no sign of such a ribbon? Why did she say she used her nose to dial her mother's phone, but there were no records of any such call? And why, when the police examined her phone, did they discover that Samantha had been in contact with someone suspicious just hours before Ernie disappeared? It didn't take long for the police to realize that this wasn't a random robbery. It was a carefully orchestrated plan, one that Samantha had masterminded. And now, they had to figure out how deep the web of lies ran. The first major break came when investigators discovered Samantha's communication with Jonathan Sanford, a man with a criminal record, recently released from prison. The police learned that he had been involved in several violent incidents in the past, and his connection to Samantha seemed more than coincidental. They quickly discovered that he had been a key player in the plot to take Ernie's life. As the investigation deepened, the detectives uncovered messages between Samantha and Jonathan, as well as between her and the other two men she had involved, Jose Ponce and Octavius Rimes. Samantha had promised them money in exchange for their help, making it clear that this wasn't a spur-of-the-moment decision. It was a plan that had been carefully crafted and executed. The investigators were now certain Samantha had orchestrated her husband's murder. But there were still questions left unanswered. Why had she done it? What had driven her to such extremes? And more importantly, who else was involved? The detectives brought in Jonathan Sanford for questioning. As soon as he walked into the room, they could see the guilt in his eyes. But they also saw something else: fear. He knew he was in deep trouble, and now, he was going to have to face the consequences of his actions. After hours of questioning, Jonathan cracked. He admitted to everything, how Samantha had manipulated him and the others into carrying out the crime. He confessed that Samantha had promised them money and a new life if they helped her. But when the plan went wrong, and Ernie was killed, everything started to spiral out of control. Jonathan's confession opened the floodgates. Soon after, Jose Ponce and Octavius Rimes were also arrested. They, too, admitted to their roles in the murder, each giving their own version of events. But it was clear the murder of Ernie Ibarra was not just a crime of passion. It was a crime of manipulation, of lies, and of desperation. The detectives now had enough evidence to charge Samantha. But the road ahead was far from over. Samantha was no longer the victim she had portrayed herself to be. She was the mastermind behind it all. And now, it was time for the truth to come to light. As the weight of the evidence grew too heavy to ignore, Samantha found herself cornered. The detectives had pieced together the story, and the walls were closing in. Samantha could no longer keep up the charade. The truth had been uncovered. Samantha was brought in for questioning. She was calm, almost eerily so. Her hands were folded neatly in front of her, her back straight as she sat in the cold, sterile interrogation room. The detectives knew she had been lying from the start. And now, it was time for the truth. Detective Ramirez began, his voice steady. Samantha, we've seen the evidence. We've spoken to your accomplices. We know you were the mastermind behind Ernie's murder. It's over. Now, we need to hear your side. Samantha didn't react at first. She sat there, staring at the table, as if gathering her thoughts. The silence between them felt thick, almost suffocating. Finally, her voice broke the stillness. I never wanted it to go this far, she whispered, almost to herself. But I had to. I couldn't lose everything. I had to make it stop. The detectives exchanged a glance. They knew this was it. Samantha was breaking. The truth was finally coming to light. She had been the one pulling the strings all along. Her confession came in a rush. She spoke of her desperation, her need for control, her belief that she deserved more than the life she had. She admitted to orchestrating the entire plan, the manipulation of Jonathan, Jose, and Octavius, promising them money in exchange for their silence and help. She had used them as pawns in her twisted game, all in an effort to rid herself of the man who had once been her everything. And now, he was gone, and she was free to have everything she had ever wanted. But as the details spilled from her lips, there was no joy in her confession. No relief. Just a hollow emptiness. She had achieved everything she thought she wanted: power, control, the perfect life, but now she realized it had all come at a far higher price than she had ever imagined. I didn't want to kill him, Samantha said, her voice trembling, but I couldn't let him take everything from me. He was going to ruin everything. I had to make sure it ended. Detective Ramirez leaned forward. But you made the choice, Samantha. You chose to kill him. Samantha nodded slowly, her eyes never leaving the table. I didn't think it would be this hard, she whispered. I didn't think it would change everything. It was a confession that rattled everyone in the room. Samantha wasn't just a grieving wife caught in a moment of passion. She wasn't just a woman trapped in a toxic relationship. She was a calculating, manipulative individual who had planned every detail of her husband's murder, driven by her own desire for control and freedom. The truth was now undeniable. Samantha Wohlford was the mastermind behind Ernie's death, and nothing could change that. As the confession ended, Samantha was left to face the reality of her actions. There was no turning back now. No way to undo the destruction she had caused. The web she had woven had unraveled completely, and the consequences of her choices would follow her for the rest of her life. The courtroom was quiet, the tension palpable. Samantha sat at the defendant's table, her face a mask of resignation. Her trial had begun, and the weight of her actions was now impossible to ignore. The evidence against her was overwhelming: her confession, the testimonies of her accomplices, the blood-stained truth of her betrayal. As the prosecution presented their case, Samantha remained silent, her eyes fixed on the table in front of her. There was no defense, no excuse for what she had done. The choice to kill Ernie had been hers, and now she had to face the consequences. In the stands, Ernie's family sat, their faces etched with grief and disbelief. They had lost a son, a brother, a father, all because of one woman's thirst for control. The children, the innocent victims of this tragedy, would never know their father again. Their lives had been shattered in an instant, and now, Samantha would pay the price. The jury deliberated for what felt like an eternity, but in the end, the verdict was clear. Samantha Wohlford was guilty of first-degree murder, kidnapping, and conspiracy. She was sentenced to 99 years in prison, to be served consecutively with the 50 years for aggravated kidnapping. There would be no parole. Samantha's face remained unreadable as the sentence was read aloud, her mind racing. She had once believed that she could have it all: the house, the children, the perfect life. But in the end, she had lost it all. Her desire for power, for control, had destroyed everything she had ever loved. In the days following her conviction, Samantha was transferred to a maximum security prison, where she would spend the rest of her life. The world that she had once manipulated and controlled had turned against her, and now she would pay the price for her greed. Her children, now in the care of Ernie's family, would grow up without a mother and without a father. They would carry the scars of this tragedy for the rest of their lives. Samantha's dream of a perfect life had become a nightmare that she could never escape from. And what of Samantha? Was she the victim of circumstance, a woman pushed to the edge by her own dissatisfaction? Or was she simply a product of her own choices, a woman who allowed her hunger for power and control to lead her down a dark path from which there was no return? As for Ernie's family, they would never be the same. The man they had loved and lost would never return, and the void left by his absence could never be filled. But they would honor his memory, and the children would grow up with the love and support of a family that still believed in doing what was right, even in the face of unspeakable tragedy. Samantha Wohlford's story was one of manipulation, desperation, and the destructive power of unchecked ambition. Her legacy would be one of pain, regret, and the lives she had destroyed along the way. But in the end, the only thing left for her was a lifetime behind bars, a fate she had brought upon herself. There was no going back. And no matter how much Samantha might have wished otherwise, the price she had paid for her desire for control would follow her until the end of her days.